I will always remember the smell of my first pair of adult-sized holiday sandals. A trip to southern France with my aunt called for a new pair of navy leather flats in soft Italian leather. Even now I can conjure the crisp tissue they were wrapped in, the rigid cardboard of their dark green box, their unblemished soles, and the sense of anticipation that I felt slipping them into my suitcase. New shoes at the beginning of a season hold a sense of promise. As we travel, they become totems for the adventures, hurdles and hikes that define our trips, be it splashes of salt water in the harbour or long walks through the market. It's why we teamed up with shoemakers Monde Béryl this summer for a sojourn to the Aegean. Alongside the brand's co-founder Lily Atherton-Hanbury and her team, we put together an itinerary in Athens that took us from the Panathenaic Stadium to the Museum of Cycladic Art, via traditional tavernas and coffee spots, before arriving at retailers Muki Mu for a rooftop party overlooking the Acropolis. There, the conversation drifted from the compelling mood of contemporary Athens to the meaning and relevance of Homer's Odyssey as a steer to resilience, hosting and modern ambition. We ended with a dip the next morning in the azure waters of the Athenian Riviera before making our way to the airport with damp hair and warm limbs from basking on the rocks. The soft suede of our ballet flats were sturdy companions. They're a little less new-looking, but all the better for it. Our Athenian outing was an opportunity to create a special issue of the show, full of the energy of the Greek capital, and reflecting on the beautiful imperfection of exploring a bustling city in the heat of the summer. This is Confect Corner, and I'm your host, Sophie Grove.
The mission of the brand is really still very much in its essence, the same as it was when we started it.
We feel it's very important to stand in a room that dates from the 1860s and working at artifacts that date from 2700 before Christ. So
iconography as an icon is probably the most important thing. I mean, every brand needs a symbol.
Welcome to Confect Corner. I'm your host, Sophie Grove, here in London. This month, we bring you a bit of a special episode recording in and around Athens as we celebrate all this cosmopolitan capital on the sea has to offer. A couple of weeks ago, we convened a group of creatives, entrepreneurs and remarkable artisans in the Greek capital to celebrate the launch of the summer issue of Confect and dip a toe into this palpable sense of creative energy felt on the Aegean. And I'm delighted to say that one of the people who joined me in Athens is also in the studio with me today, Confect's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. Hello, Natalie. Welcome to Confect Corner.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's amazing to see you here in the cosy studio, but we had a bit of an adventure on the Aegean and a really nice swim at the very end of our little mini break together.
Exactly. It was the first swim of the summer for me, and I'm always kind of looking back to that day and reminiscing.
I love the fact, well, you really learn a little bit more about someone when you're swimming. You're quite ambitious. We kind of got in and you were swimming off at pace. We swam about half a mile down the coast.
I know. I mean, having grown up in the Mediterranean, just next to Athens in Cyprus, we take our swims quite seriously. And it was so nice when we finally reached the pier and kind of had a little break there. Couldn't think of a better way to start the summer.
No, completely. We sort of basked like sort of cats on rocks, just on this terracotta kind of jetty next to lots of lovely Grecian sort of old ladies, and we felt like we were really taking in a moment at the Riviera. But let's go back to why we were in Athens, because you were very instrumental into making this little trip happen. And, it was really a sense of a little sojourn, but we were exploring with a footwear brand, Monde Béryl. So give us a sense, why we did this and what the concept was.
I think it was so many things coming together. At the beginning of the year, I was actually just having a conversation with Lily Hanbury from Monde Béryl, the footwear brand that we all love, about what's been happening in Athens. I think after having quite a few tough years. It's so amazing to see sort of creative renaissance in the city, with a lot of international creatives moving to the capital, but also Greeks moving back and starting their own businesses, opening galleries. There's just such a momentum. And it's also meant that it's now a place where a lot of designers like Lily keep coming back to visit galleries and museums and have conversations and draw inspiration for their collections. Of course, for us, it's always a source of inspiration, especially when we are looking at the summer issue. So it just made perfect sense to kind of fly there to start the summer, celebrate the launch of the summer issue, and just have a great time.
And I think one of the themes really was exploring the idea of travel, the memories and that kind of sort of patina that you get with your shoes, with everything you own, as you travel, as you kind of explore a city. And we went to some sites of kind of ancient history with the stadium. We started in the morning there, and then we sort of went around looking at beautiful little coffee shops, but also the Cycladic Museum, looking at antiquities and sculptures. I think the idea was that we were kind of creating this, itinerary that also was reflecting on kind of like an exploration and a sense of that kind of formative journey, the real journey, and how the things we take with us sort of become part of that.
Absolutely. I think it's summer travel and exploring a city and finding moments of inspiration. And of course, the way that you do it, especially if you're exploring a city in the heat of the summer and the way you're dressed, the things that you bring with you, it always kind of helps shape memories. And we were all wearing our lovely ballet flats from Monde Béryl and kind of taking each other on this journey, and everyone was sharing places they love, moments of inspiration, starting with Marmaro, which is such a beautiful spot in central Athens, which has historic significance, but at the same time, it's somewhere where locals always jog around. And then, I don't know about you, Sophie, but the Cycladic Museum really kind of left an impression on me, and I think on the whole group, because it was such an emotional exhibition.
Completely. It was mesmerizing, and just the feeling of connecting with, the past, the present, the feeling of, real humanity. It was just quite overwhelming in a sense. And I don't usually feel like that in exhibitions. But I think you're right. This kind of idea of that hot, kind of wonderful journey where you're kind of, the pavements are really sort of warm and you're kind of darting around the city looking for patches of shade and glasses of iced coffee. You're kind of on this wonderful world. It's a challenge to travel in the summer, but it just bears so much fruit, and the memories are so crystal in your mind that I think we really evoked that. And hopefully this episode, which we're about to unfurl because we were gathering audio all the way through, will reflect a bit of that. Now, what values do we share with our ancient ancestors? How did the people 4,500 years ago feel, think, grieve and love as mothers, lovers and friends? It's something South African artist Marlene Dumas has probed and reflected on when taking on the curation of her recent exhibition at the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens.
Housed in a beautiful 19th century villa, the museum has an ambitious contemporary art program which has welcomed the likes of Louise Bourgeois and Ai Weiwei to exhibit their works here alongside the collections of antiquities. Dumas was instantly drawn to the simple forms of the Cycladic figurines as well as their lack of embellishment.
By placing them next to her works, she sought to explore such themes as age, sexuality, the passage of time, and the complexity of human relationships. In Athens, I spoke to the museum's contemporary art programme advisor, Aphrodite Gonu, and with development coordinator Delegini Plifti, and I started by asking Aphrodite about the museum's work.
The most important part of the Cycladic Museum, the collection of Cycladic objects, are objects that many artists have already responded to through the years, especially modern artists. They were introduced in Paris by Zervos, and Picasso, Modigliani, many artists had looked at these objects. So we already knew that these were objects loved because of their minimalism, of the fact that they seem to be so contemporary in a way, because with so few marks, they talk about the human existence. We don't really know what they were about, how they were used, but it seems to be about fertility, but also about humanity. To my experience, like whenever we have invited either a curator or an artist, they have such an emotional response to the collection that everyone accepts our invitation to do a project, but each curator or artist chooses to respond in a very different way. So in the past, artists like Kounelis, for example, just created new work and spent like months in Athens to create new objects for the exhibition, but didn't choose to include objects from the permanent collection. Some years ago, Ai Weiwei chose to put works inside the permanent collections. In this case, Marlène Dumas spent a lot of time looking at these objects and included works in the exhibition that you see here, which is the most interesting thing is to see how artists choose objects for other reasons that maybe a curator would choose them, like for their form, for their color, for their movement, or for what they feel the emotional responses to them.
It's very powerful to stand next to a figure that is 4,500 years old, but then also look at a piece that is created relatively recently and feel the synergy between them. Tell me about how Marlène Dumas created some of these works and how she explored the theme of cycladic blues, which is a very sort of multidimensional theme. There's a lot of melancholy here, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of tenderness. Give us a sense of how you feel that she sort of just uniquely approached the challenge in a sense.
It's a very interesting question because at the museum, because we did not have like a very strategic agenda when it comes to what an artist should show, or whether they should show contemporary, earliest works or later works. It's actually a carte blanche. It's a white paper. So having seen the Cycladic Blues title, perhaps, you know, it's not like the happiest of the exhibitions, but it's certainly one of the most introspective. When it comes to Marlène Dumas, because she's not only very eloquent and she handles the words amazingly well. She writes poetry, she writes essays, she's extremely articulate, has a very deep sense of humor about her own existence, about the human existence in general. We felt like the title Cycladic Blues kind of encapsulates this need, this human need to wonder about life. And perhaps this poses a question mark as to the use, quote unquote, of the Cycladic figurines. What did they stand for? When you get to see a body depicting another body and trying to make it timeless, what does it stand for? Does it stand of a mark in time to be remembered, to be worshipped, to be adored? So Marlène Dumas' almost obsession, if I'm allowed to say this word, of the human body puts to the front these questions. The body that is bruised, that is aging, that has wrinkles, or has smooth surface, or has hair, or is hairless. It's moving, it's static, it's male, it's female, it's all of the above. So here what we see is humans watching other humans, basically. And what you mentioned about the energy, we feel it's very important to stand in a room that dates from the 1860s and working at artifacts that date from 2700 before Christ, so 4,500 years old, and being in the midst of a work that is created in 2025. So where do you stand as a point of your own body in time? How does your body ages? How does your body evolve? What memories it carries? So all of that takes us to the next step, or takes the exhibition to the next step, as to the human emotions and the body as a carrier of human emotions and human experiences that turn into emotions, because we know very well that we don't remember everything in life, but remember the feeling that we had in each experience. So melancholy for us and for Dumas is a very human, fragile, tender state. And it's not highlighted enough, especially during our times. We're either happy or sad, ecstatic or depressed. What is in between? What is the spectrum of emotion? And how does the body carry this very, very complex state of melancholy?
I think it's very powerful how you expressed that, and I did feel that walking around. A very exquisite kind of sense of how human I felt, surrounded by her work. But give me a sense of Dumas as an artist. You have done such a great job of giving an insight into how her biography has really informed her approach and her South African heritage particularly.
So she was born in 1953 during the height of the apartheid authoritarian state in the South Africa near Cape Town, and moved in 1956 to Amsterdam to continue her studies. Time and time again, she will, mention that color is it's not about skin, it's about art, and how she views through this experience of this segregated community and her distance from the actual world within this very closed Dutch Calvinist society, of how she viewed the world, and when she went to Amsterdam, how the world suddenly opened up, and she was able to work and be related to everybody actually, without having a very strict identity, either ethnic or sexual or whatever you may call it, or gender. So I think this is very much reflected in her work, because her work is not about a strict identity. It's about the assumptions that you make of the identity of the person that you're looking at. And I'm not talking about the social identity, I'm talking about the bodily, the physical identity. You may see that the bodies here mostly are naked, actually not revealing anything but hiding, because when a body is clothed, we get to make assumptions about it. When a body is being portrayed within a grander landscape, again, we place it somewhere. What assumptions do we make when we just see a body, when we just see a face in a timeless background? Exactly like the psychedelic figurines. It's the assumptions become very personal.
And just finally, you've been working with Marlene and you've got to know her to some extent. You said that she's incredibly sarcastic, she's incredibly poetic at times, but also you mentioned Socratic. Tell me about working with her and who and what she's like as a person.
What I've told you off the record, and we're very happy to say here, is that sometimes you get to mythologize certain artists and their work is different from their personal life. In Marlene Dumas, not only the myth lived on, but we were equally thrilled with her openness, with her extrovert tendency to talk about her art, to even question her art. This was a very generous thing to do, coming from a safe space of actual ambiguity. And I dare say that because her poetic work is so ambiguous and so dark and sarcastic at times, which leaves a room for us to start conversations just for the sake of conversations. So although we can of course trace back in her work a lot of other artists, homages to almost every period in the history of art, this is a very fruitful conversation. However, it doesn't end in conversation there, because what you mentioned about the Socratic conversation is that during the time that we got to spend together, the Cycladic Museum's team and Douglas Fogel, the curator of the exhibition, and Marlene Dumas herself, was that she was always posing a question in the end. Am I right? Did I remember correctly? Well, perhaps I don't know, or perhaps I'm just, I'm not right here. And that, again, takes us back to her tender nature, how she sees the world and her conversations as an open window to a question, to am I right? Am I really right? That's fantastic to ask, because it's very rare, and it's very rare for an artist of her status and her, her presence for almost 50 years in the art world.
That was Aphrodite Gonu and Delegina Prifti at the Museum of Cycladic Art in Athens. This is Confect Corner, and after the break, we hear from our deputy editor, Chiara Rumella, who will join me in the studio to tell me all about the new summer issue of Confect. Stay tuned. Lovely to see you, Chiara. This is a special episode about, Athens really, but Greece more widely. And I wanted to bring you in because I know that you were one of the editors on the Monocle book of Greece, which took a lot of your time. I had to part with you for large periods while you went stomping around the Peloponnese. But now we've got, our summer issue is out, and there is actually a sort of smattering, beautiful smattering of Grecian stories in the issue. Firstly, there's an amazing roundtable. It's actually a collaborative piece with One and Only. But tell me a bit about the roundtable you chaired on the Athenian Riviera.
Yes, I've become something of a Greekophile in the past couple of years. And it means a lot, I think, coming from an Italian, because we are all very territorial about our summers. And then through the book project and also my personal inclinations, I ended up spending some of my summer in Greece. And I sort of got it. And I had to give it to them. The island life truly is beautiful and seductive. But I think precisely to that point, lots of people associate summer in Greece with the islands. And it wasn't always so. There was a time in the mid-century when the most glamorous thing you could do was actually not to get on the ferry from the Piraeus, but to stick around Athens in what was called and is called still now the Athenian Riviera, which was this stretch of coast going south from Athens proper into Glyfada and these other smaller municipalities where, truly the glitziest and most fascinating personalities from the grand society, from the states and beyond would flock. And it was a really fascinating time also because I think architecturally and structurally the Riviera felt really different. It was all low-slung bungalows kind of sunk into beautiful perfumed shrubbery, and you just had this feeling that you were really close to cosmopolitan Athens but also in this kind of idyllic type of spot. And then that sort of disappeared for a few years, and people genuinely kind of fell out of love with it. There was some development that didn't quite follow the same spirit of its heyday. And I think more and more hotels and projects on the Riviera are trying to revive that moment, that absolute heyday, that dreamy kind of Slim Aarons like ideal that we have in our heads. And so that's why we convened, conveniently, we convened just by the waterfront at the One and Only, which is one of said projects trying to bring that sort of spirit back, gathering some truly interesting women across the creative spectrum in Athens. From Marilena Andreadi, who runs a swimwear brand, to Elektra Soutzoglu, who runs kind of her family carpet business but has taken it into a completely different direction. And then Andrea Mitsakos, who is the founder of Anthologist, but also kind of PR extraordinaire for many of Athens and Greece's most interesting hospitality projects.
Oh, who I interviewed for this podcast. So she's coming up. But it's amazing that the names of these people, Demetria as well. It's what I loved about being in Athens. A lot of people have classical names. Like, I met so many Ariadnes and beautiful, beautiful names that I'm familiar with. But I think this cast is particularly interesting because they are the face of modern Athens, and they have this incredible sort of sense of investment in craft, in design, in the Greek identity and contemporary sort of momentum that we've seen over the last couple of years. But then also looking back to how you can revive a Riviera. I mean, we drove, as part of our itinerary, we sort of snuck away in the last morning, and Natalie and I, we got in a taxi and we bombed along the road and went for a quick swim just a bit further than you were in this piece, just past the resort. But there was a real mix. You know, sometimes you'd see a beach club that looked completely mid-century but actually derelict. The next thing along looked glorious, and then you'd see something a little bit in between. So it isn't the escapism that you find on the islands. It's something really mixed. It's urban chic. It's a kind of urban beach.
Definitely. And I had the pleasure of going for a swim myself, of course, knowing us editors at Confect would never think of going to Athens without dipping in the Aegean. And I think it's just a really different experience. But how many cities can you genuinely think of where you can go for such a satisfying swim within 30 minutes of the city centre? I mean, I'm Italian, and yes, you have Genoa, you have Naples, you have Palermo. All these places have nice city beaches, but not, I don't think, to the level that we're talking about here. Because sometimes if you go far enough, you can really kind of forget yourself a little bit when you're in those little coves. And I think that's really beautiful. But I will say that, you know, obviously the conversation that we had began from this place of the Riviera, but really extended to what it means to be in Athens today. You know, some of these women didn't always live in Athens. They moved abroad and then they came back. And there was the sense of like what pulled them back to this place in this piece, and discussing exactly as you say, where does the line between the reverence for the past and the sense of innovation stand? I think a lot of people genuinely sense this atmosphere of excitement in the air. Lots of people are coming to Athens from across Europe. Lots of artists are going to Athens. And there is an ebullience in the air. And there's also an excitement from the part of the Athenians who see that all these people are coming and are interested, and it's reinvigorating what was already there. So I think it's a really nice interplay. It's not just the expats coming in and renting out cheap studios, you know. There is a genuine interchange and an exchange between all these people that is lifting everyone up. And that's something that we've experienced in the city for a long time, but I think it's really, really coming to fruition now. What was your experience of the city when you were there?
Well, exactly. I mean, we met so many incredibly interesting people. There's such a cosmopolitan perspective. But I felt so moved by the kind of ancient history as well, and how that kind of intersects with the modernity around you, because it is just such a storied place, but then it's so thriving. Finally, because there's a great essay at the back of Confect Summer's issue about the Odyssey, because there's a new film coming out, a Christopher Nolan film, and I just watched another one, which was an incredible piece, Pasolini with Juliette Binoche as Penelope, which was quite recently launched. But this piece, Thalia wrote about her own relationship with the Odyssey as a Greek woman, and all the different themes are there. Resilience is there, hospitality is there, a kind of cunning, all these interesting traits and Homeric virtues that are kind of knitted into the Greek identity. And I spoke about this essay to quite a few people at the party we had, and it was just so interesting. Everyone has a really passionate and intimate relationship with this story.
Yeah, you think of the Odyssey as something that's very universal, right? It's one of the great texts of, you know, global literature. But each one of us, depending on our nationalities, will have these stories like imprinted in the back of our minds. You know, for us in Italy, it's a divine comedy, which to everybody else perhaps doesn't have the same resonance. I mean, I don't know if you feel it like with the Canterbury Tales, but, you know, there will be texts that have really informed the way that you look at the world. And you can really feel it in Talea's words, that these things are not just kind of empty literary symbols. They are the fabric of your existence. They are what shapes your way of looking at the world. And I think that's fabulous. Again, it goes back to the idea of the interplay between the myth and contemporary life, between the Parthenon up on the hill and then the kind of the gritty streets where you're going for a glass of natural wine.
And it's interesting, she says, what is Ithaca? Is it a small rocky island or a metaphor for peace, a dream that you'll never reach? And then you think, God, maybe it's not, there is a place called Ithaca now, but then it's so powerful as its moment, just as a moment, as an ideal in everybody's mind, particularly Greek people. This essay really sums up some of the themes that we were talking about on our trip, how the ancient interacts with the contemporary and where that leaves you as a human being just on this planet, having a look around this timeless, endless city. But we have to just stop talking now because... Sorry. That's the whole episode. I would say do read the issue and seek out these lovely Grecian stories. But thank you so much, Chiara, for joining me on this special episode of Confect Corner. Up next, we're stepping into the world of Monde Béryl, the footwear brand known for its quietly confident silhouettes, impeccable materials, and nods to classic design. Since its founding, the label has carved out a niche in the luxury landscape by reimagining timeless styles like the Venetian gondola slipper and bringing them into everyday wardrobes with elegance and ease.
During the launch of the summer issue of Confect, I had a chance to catch up with Monde Béryl's co-founder, Lily Atherton-Hanbury. I asked her about building a brand with global appeal, the enduring value of craft, and why she keeps returning to Athens for inspiration.
When we spoke about it, I remember my point of view was that Athens has always been, I'd never spent a long time here, but I always spend a couple of days or kind of pass through. And I feel recently that so many people, artists, writers, creatives have moved here, and the food scene and the gallery scene, it's all seems to be sprouting up. Also in this space where there's so much history and reverence for the history, and that tension and juxtaposition is really interesting to me personally, but I think it's also what's made it so dynamic here and exciting.
And it's a moment of serendipity, right? That there is an exhibition of Ron Nagel who inspired the very beginnings of Monde Béryl. So tell me a little bit about that story, because I know it's a story that people really love to hear.
So during the Venice Biennale, I think it was 2012, was when the idea started. We didn't start the brand until 2016, but the penny kind of dropped during that Biennale because it was raining for most of it. And it was, I was there with my family, my sister's an artist, my brother-in-law, all of my friends. It was just such a convergence of joy and discovery, but it was also raining. So there was this element of practicality with my footwear because we were walking around all day trying to see as much as possible on and off boats. And one of my favorite discoveries that year was Ron Nagel in the International Pavilion, and has really stuck with me since, and I've followed his work since then. And also I met Andreas and his cousin who were there together during that trip, and it was his gallery where we saw the exhibition tonight. But coming back to the shoes, it was also in that moment when there was this kind of trying to do as much as possible in a short period of time, and walking around in the rain, needed to go to Pino's amazingly glamorous party, which I had packed stilettos for, but it was raining and we had to take a boat and it was just not gonna happen. So I grabbed a pair of Venetian slippers and it looked amazing with my outfit. And then we actually went on from there to Jarvis Cocker was DJing in this old boat manufacturing warehouse, and danced for hours, which has come full circle because we're now doing a collaboration with his wife, whose favorite ceramicist is also Ron Nagel. And so in that project, there's a lot of, just coincidentally, a lot of playing with textures, like shiny, rough, and yeah, it's like it really, to me, and also to her, has a lot of inspiration in Ron Nagel's work.
And this is what we've been doing, and kind of walking around the city in Le Monde Béryl flats, and it's testament. I know for a fact now that, it's such comfort and it makes it easy to experience the city. But I wonder, since that initial idea of doing the Venetian slippers, and now it's been more than a decade and the brand has really blossomed, how has the mission evolved in many ways, or are you always thinking about travel and function? And
I think that the brand has evolved and the team has evolved. We've grown an amazing team, which is, also a big part of what this trip is about, is with Rebecca, our commercial director, put together her local favorites because she lives here. But it's the mission of the brand is really still very much in its essence the same as it was when we started it. And that was finding, looking back to make something new, turning functionality and movement into luxury, and really detailing craft and different cultural influences in it, and collaboration. We were talking earlier today about this idea of it being really a collective of people and inspiration coming together, which actually was when we were at the Cycladic Museum, and when they were talking about the foundations of the museum being female founded, about this sort of female led team, female inspired art. I was thinking about, it resonated thinking about our own team, which is largely, we are female founded. It is a female team. And the way she spoke about Marlene's work being very openly crediting her inspirations, I feel like that is kind of how we look at the brand too, is we feel like everyone on our team has a voice and that it is a collective more than on.
Yes, I guess you kept the focus on function and comfort, but it's kind of blossomed into this bigger collective, and I guess newer styles with a focus. You'll never see stilettos you can walk in Le Monde Béryl. It's just an evolution of the initial mission.
Yes, exactly. We are doing so many different categories, like an après-ski collection to heels, but everything is with this idea of movement and travel and feeling you're wearing them for yourself.
And is art, does that play a role? Just because we've spent the day first looking at Marlene Dumas, like you were saying, and then Ron Nagel, does that, for you as a creative, and also when it comes to actually designing the collections, is it a big reference point or something that you really need to stay inspired?
Yes, it's a huge reference point from season to season. The colors and the stories behind it, but also just the living that life of traveling and seeing as much as possible and learning as much as possible. The shoes are what take us there, and that is really at the heart of the brand, is that making something that enhances your ability to live your life to the maximum.
And on that subject of travel, I mean, you did design the perfect 24 hours for all of us in Athens. Any personal highlights from everything we've done, or everything that has been on the schedule so far?
I loved seeing Andreas's gallery, and that space was so beautiful. The show was so beautiful. Yeah, and I loved Rebecca's highlights of coffee shops.
And now we're off to Mukimu, where I think is one of the best shops in Athens, and Le Monde Béryl was displayed so beautifully there. Is that kind of an important part of when you're thinking of where to display the shoes, which retailers you partner with, that it is this kind of boutiques that have a point of view?
Yes, we're very, it's very important to us to feel like the shoes are always a point of discovery, like that it's not, we're very careful with our retail partners that they're the places that we would want to shop in, and we're quite selective about our retail partners. And Mukimu, both in London and here, is just incredibly curated and very beautiful. And the space here, architecturally and in terms of all of her other curations, it's just incredible. With the terrace where we'll have drinks under the Acropolis, it's an incredible, unique space.
Lily Atherton of Hanbury, founder of Le Monde Béryl there. Natalie, such a great interview. It really struck me, talking to Lily and spending time with her, that Athens had been a great inspiration, but it really feels like it has that draw at this moment in time. And I wondered, how does it fuel her kind of creative engines for the brand?
I think Lily has always looked to art for inspiration, and right now, given everything that's happening in Athens, she keeps kind of coming back, spends time in Athens. She also loves going to Hydra, and it was interesting to start our evening with her at the Melas Martinos Gallery, and she was telling me how Ron Nagel was actually one of the first artists and the exhibitions that she visited, and she discovered his work, and that was what sparked the initial idea for Le Monde Béryl. So revisiting it with her in Athens was wonderful. But she finds that this mix of old and new, ancient and contemporary is a real kind of source of inspiration. Part of her team is based here in Athens. And I think alongside with the incredible art scene, designers also just love coming to the city and enjoying the lifestyle, like we were mentioning earlier, having an Freddo espresso in Kolonaki, visiting the beach. It's kind of a way to reset creatively as well and to think about new collections.
It's such fuel for the soul as well. I mean, we were just there for a few days, but there's a real feel-good factor in Athens. There's a real positivity and energy that is just palpable at the moment. And we had a party with Le Monde Béryl and Mukimu on the roof of Mukimu, which is a beautiful shop in the old city. But I felt that this really wonderful sense of being on the roof as the sun set. You could see the Acropolis, and everyone was there kind of, but really just very creatively expressing their sense of style. Do you think Athens is really finding its own sartorial groove at this moment in time as well?
I definitely think so. And speaking to some of the wonderful designers and creatives who had come that night, what struck me is that they were saying that recently there's a lot more pride in made in Greek product, in Athens' own kind of approach to fashion. Well, before, I think everyone was looking to the bigger fashion capitals. There was more of an obsession with everything that's foreign, and now they're looking at their own heritage and also drawing international designers to Athens who go for inspiration.
Our next guest is Andrea Mitsakos, the founder and creative director of Anthologist, a design house where travel, craft and narrative converge.
Drawing inspiration from global journeys, ancient craftsmanship and a keen editorial eye, Mitsakos creates pieces that feel timeless yet unexpected. From hand-woven textiles to curated objets d'art, it's all about championing provenance, collaboration and personal connection.
I sat down with Mitsakos to talk about reviving traditional techniques, her work to build a modern lifestyle brand rooted in heritage, and why meaningful design always begins with a good story and iconography.
Iconography as an icon is probably the most important thing. I mean, every brand needs a symbol, and our symbol is the hemera, which is the animal that's made from a lion, a goat, and a serpent. And I chose that as our symbol because I am a Leo. My Buddhist sign is a naga, and I love goats. And in my house in Paros, as you saw a lot of goats around there as well. And it's a very powerful symbol, and I think that it also means that you're somewhat of a shapeshifter. matter. And I think that's really important in today's day and age, especially in design, that you can be flexible and nimble and both in design and how you decorate your own house and also how you do work with all of these artisans. Sometimes I'll meet an artisan and I'll have an idea, but then they'll say, from an engineering standpoint, I can't make it like that. So then I end up with a completely different product, which is sometimes the most beautiful thing.
And tell me about working with Greek artisans. I know that you've gone through far and wide now, and it's a very eclectic collection. But tell me about the Greek sort of talent that you have sort of discovered and rediscovered here.
Well, I moved to Greece in 2013. I was designing bags in Milan at the time, and it was during the financial crisis. And I found some people that were working in leather. My grandmother had worked in leather. It was really incredible to be able to find people that worked in this way, but still very old world in that sense. And we also work with a brass foundry where they use sand molds. They pour all the metals by hand, finish everything by hand. I mean, it's an ancient art, which is incredible. We're also doing blown glass here, which is, we're one of the only companies that are working with one of the last mouth-blown glass maestros in the country. And it's all pieces based on from the Hellenistic period.
I mean, they're so beautiful, and your kind of studio is here in Athens, but also you have a beautiful little shop, or shops, actually, in Paros.
Yes.
But tell me about how you've gone further beyond the kind of Aegean. You've been really kind of hunting for amazing artisans. How have you developed the collection, and where is it going next? Because I know you're launching something quite exciting at the moment.
We are launching our Himera collection, which is the jewelry based on our symbol. We're also launching ready-to-wear, which is new for us, which we are producing beautiful batik fabrics in Sri Lanka, just a few hours outside of Colombo. So when I was a little girl and my mother and I would family go on holiday, she would always wear these beautiful batik outfits in the Caribbean. So when I decided to do resort wear, I thought it needs to be that because it reminds me of holiday. And Greece has plenty of great fashion designers, so I don't need to be another one. I need to do something quite unique. So we make all of the batik in Sri Lanka, and then we manufacture in Egypt, actually.
Because it's remarkable, because we have a sort of Egypt special in the magazine. We've shot a story there, and I feel like there's incredible energy in Cairo, but also just the textiles and some of the savoir-faire that's there is incredible.
Yeah.
Tell me about working there and discovering people there.
Yeah, sure. We're also doing an amazing bag collection that is all crochet, and it's actually fully sustainable because the yarn that the bags are crocheted from are made from leftover carpets. So these carpets, they collect all of the yarns. They're spun into the different colors that make these crochet bags, and we work with a group of women there. They all work from home. There are two sisters who, sort of helm the group of women, and we give them the design, and, we go back and forth on WhatsApp. My whole life is on WhatsApp making samples, and then, I get to go there and work with them too. So we're really excited about that. It's one of our best sellers at our shops in Paros.
It's so colourful and glorious and expressive as a bag. It's kind of got its own personality.
Thank you. Yes. I always think a bright colour can also serve as a neutral. Some people are afraid of colour. Obviously, I'm not. So.
But it's such a beautiful evening, as you said. Like, we're on this rooftop. We can see the Acropolis. It's balmy. It's like heaven here. I am almost scared about going back to London, even though we're having quite good weather. Tell me about Athens at this moment. How has the city changed since you've moved here? There's a real mood here that is infectious.
Absolutely. I came during the financial crisis from New York City by way of a lot of other places. But I always feel that crisis breeds creativity. So there was like a hum going on of things, I think, when I came here. But sometimes it takes an outsider's point of view to come in and find something that I can see in a different way. I think Greeks are finally getting used to buying Greek again, where they thought if something was foreign, it was almost better. And so I think there's a newfound discovery. I think Athens is coming into her own.
Andrea Mitsakos, founder of Anthologist, thank you for joining us. And that brings us to the end of this special episode of Confect Corner. My thanks to Natalie Theodosi for joining me in the studio, and also to Confect's Chiara Rumella. Confect Corner is produced and edited by Carlotta Rebello and Steph Chungu. Remember to pick up your copy of the summer issue of Confect magazine, which is out now, or subscribe by heading to confectmagazine.com. Until next time, from me, Sophie Grove, goodbye and thanks for listening.